Hello everybody, welcome to another Like a Dragon Asian guide. In today's guide, I'll show you a personal recommendation for endgame gear that should get you by most if not all content just fine. A bit of a disclaimer though, there is a big amount of weapons and equipment in this game, and with the addition of seals that weren't in the original to my knowledge, that just adds that much more room for experimenting. I'm not saying this video will give you the absolute best, no contest kind of equipment, because as far as I know, you can get a sword from Amon, the secret boss, that can then be upgraded to be the best sword in the game. But to get access to the secret boss, you need to finish all the sub-stories and all the dungeon battles as well. I've heard that once that's done, you need to play the last dungeon battle to be introduced to him. But that's something you shouldn't worry about now, because if you're here, chances are you just want to get a decent weapon that will help get you there. First, let's talk about materials and where to get at least most of the ones you might need. On this build of mine or otherwise, there's 3 places that I use, and outside of an exception or 2, they are all I ever needed. Number 1, the Shinto Priest Virtue Exchange. You can find the priest on the upper left corner of the map where he'll just be chilling next to a shrine. And for future reference, if you want to find a specific establishment, press the list button on the map and that should help. Keep in mind that you need to first unlock this virtue shop from the shrine itself by using virtue to unlock that. And then you need to upgrade his shop so his item selection increases. If you're low on virtue, check out this other guide of mine that covers how to farm money and virtue simultaneously. Link will be in the description. The priest has some materials that can also be obtained from the dungeon, which we'll be talking about shortly, but you can kind of make it quicker with him because the dungeon is RNG and, well, you get stuff from him guaranteed. Number 2, the blacksmith material shop. It's easy to forget about this one considering that the first thing you see going in isn't him, but he sells a very good selection of materials, so you should definitely keep him in mind. Number 3, the dungeon missions. These are unfortunately based on RNG when it comes to getting exactly what you want. In other words, you're not guaranteed to get the material that you want when you play the specific mission that has the material you want. And I've seen comments about asking to find another method, and I really do feel for you guys, and I hate to be the one to break it to you, but the original Ishin made it so that you'd need to embrace the grind, and this remake isn't really any different in that regard. Sooner or later, you will come back to the dungeons. They contain probably every single material you could possibly ever need. I mentioned exceptions earlier, and that's with things like vegetables. There are a few weapons that have vegetables as materials for crafting them, and to get those, you'd need to go to Haruka's farm that you're introduced to just by playing the story eventually. To access her farm, you need to take this boat in Fushimi down here at this spot. You'll be able to access more vegetables by unlocking them from the shrine as well, so that's another reason to grind for virtue. To speed up the process for vegetable farming, get your hands on a lot of fertilizers from this pharmacy here also in Fushimi. Let's take the jelly blade for example. You need a bunch of taros to craft it, and these can be made in the farm. Now here's how to efficiently use the fertilizers. Interact with this little shed to open up the farming menu, reset the farming plan, and then go in there and put as many taros in there as you can, and then use a fertilizer right after you do that. Once done, leave that menu, go into the house nearby, and then back out into the menu again, and that will reset the farm state and you'll be able to use the fertilizer again. This is necessary because normally you're not able to use fertilizer multiple times in a row, so leaving and quote-unquote resetting the farm this way will allow you to do so. So far, this was all just to give you an idea of where you get most of the materials you'll need. With a game of this scale, there's bound to be other options that aren't in this brief video. Now that I gave you multiple locations to get materials for your own future reference, let's move on to the build that I've been using. A build that works pretty well even in the later dungeon missions and the arena. Just to get this out of the way, I'll be talking about all these equipment at the highest rarity, so I'll do some explaining on how to get that. When you craft an item at the blacksmith, you're able to use different types of hammers, and that's what determines what rarity you'll get. Typically, the more in-betweens there are when you start aiming for something, the better, because this means that you can use more lower tier hammers to get the highest rarity of the weapon or equipment eventually. But say for example you craft something that has no prerequisites, then that means you'll have to use the highest tier hammer, the Kiwami hammer, to get that something at the highest tier. Anyway, for the sword, I picked the Onimaru purely because it has the most damage output when it comes to the numbers, and the number of empty slots in it isn't too bad if I want to put additional seals into it. And for the gun, a decent option would be the golden gun, which you can buy from the gambling den exchange for 125,000 tags. For this, you'll need to do chicken racing, which is mentioned in the money guide I linked earlier. Another option that I also use is Model 14, which has pretty good damage and a very good amount of seal slots. Moving on to equipment, I used the Divine Dragon emblem for the head accessory. I feel like this piece piece strikes a balance between the amount of defense it provides and the amount of seal slots it has, and the built-in heat-related seals aren't too shabby. For the body armor, I use Brawler's Binding because out of all the ones you can craft here, this has the highest base defense value, and also the highest seal slots, though it seems like no other body armor here goes beyond 4 slots. For the gauntlets, I went with the Unbreakable Stance Gauntlets because it seemed the most balanced in terms of defense given and the slots as well. Of course, it's up to you whether you find other pieces more enticing to make, but these are the pieces that I used for my endgame grinding and they've done a great job for me. You might be wondering about seals and how to get them. So far, I think the most not boring way of farming them is to just try your luck with random encounters, or maybe try to farm for equipment in the dungeons. I think when you craft things at the blacksmith and there's multiple slots, you get a chance of adding a seal, but that's a process that requires saving and then a lot of loading and possibly material hunting to be able to craft so much. It remains to be seen if there's a reliable way to get them. That's all for this video. Hope it was useful to someone out there. If it was, a like and a sub would help me out a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next video, peace!